Hey there, my name is Clint, and I'm the creator of TLDRSec, a cybersecurity newsletter bringing you the latest and greatest security tools, articles, and more right in your inbox. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Max and Chris from Material Security to do a deep dive into all the awesome things that their platform does. Yeah, can you introduce yourselves a little bit so that we know who you are?
Sure thing. I'll hop in first. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Max Pollard. I'm the director of solutions engineering at Material Security. I've been here over 4 years now, and background before that was spent some time at Okta. Before that was actually in quant finance.
Hey y'all, my name is Chris Long. I often go by Klong. I'm the Director of Security and Threat Research here at Material. Previous to Material, I worked at a couple tech companies in the Bay Area, Netflix, Palantir, and Facebook.
Very cool. So today I thought there's always lots of talk about phishing is the cause of a bunch of breaches. And rather than throwing a bunch of stats at people, I thought it would be fun to say instead, if you had this really awesome integration into your email provider and maybe the broader workspace like Google Workspace and stuff like that, like as a defender, what's cool stuff you could do? How can you maybe detect attacks coming in, or once someone's already in, how would you flag that? So at a high level, what would be some ways that you think come to mind?
Yeah, I can kick this off. I think I think about this in multiple dimensions. There's kind of like the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the consequences, right? So with that mental model, most of what we see in the space today is surrounding the threats, right? Like what bad emails are coming in. How can I block those at the edge, right? But there's lots of other stuff. If you're going to assume like I have this unfettered access to the APIs of Google Workspace and Microsoft, that I might start visualizing or ingesting where my vulnerabilities are, right? What misconfigurations I have in those service, be it by settings or groups or users. How can I start to surface some of that data? And then also, I'd probably want to start scoping the consequences, right? If a bad email gets in, or an attacker gets a session, or any of one of these things happen, right? Like what's at stake. And so, I'd probably seek to use those APIs as well to start to surface what data is at risk if one of these things were to happen, right? What are my consequences? So that's kind of how I'd start looking at it.
To follow up to that, I think a lot of organizations naturally don't necessarily want to consider what it looks like if a breach were to occur, what the incident response process would be like, what the actual impact, how much sensitive data might be in that compromised email box would be. So it's a natural thing to not want to kind of go down that thought path. But one of the great things about Material is having the ability to kind of quickly get a handle on, what type of sensitive information is in an inbox and what can I do about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that was interesting to me as I thought about it more and got into it a bit deeper is, yeah, there's a bunch of subtleties actually. Like obviously there's the, malicious phishing email comes in and you want to detect it, but there's really a number of sort of subtle second order things that can happen, or ways that you can persist access, for example, as an attacker, even if, you kill all the sessions and rotate credentials and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there's some subtle risks and bad things that can happen that we're going to talk about in a moment that I think are not obvious unless you thought about it a lot. So I think that's pretty cool. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing the overview. So in a second, we'll show maybe the dashboard and like, hey, this is what it looks like. And this is sort of the core functionality. But first, people might be curious, like, how do I get set up? What does that onboarding flow look like? And does it take a long time, or sort of what access do you need?
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the beautiful things about being an API based email solution is there's no modification of networking, right? Like I don't have to go into MX and DNS and change a bunch of stuff. The onboarding is really simple. We basically, via Google Workspace or Microsoft, publish a list of scopes, and then you grant access to a subset or a majority of those via domain-wide delegation. So it's it's a couple clicks, and the onboarding is fairly easy. And then from there, again, another very nice thing about not being kind of like a gateway or a proxy in front of your workspace environment is that you can decide which users or groups we leverage these permissions or scopes on, right? Like you can on off different settings, features from there. So yeah, pretty simple process, and we can even dive into some of the visuals behind that a little later today if needed.
Cool. I like it. Yeah, Max, if you don't mind sharing your screen to show us what the dashboard looks like.
Yeah, sure thing. So here's kind of a sneak peek at the dashboard here, and just to give a sense of maybe what I just talked through first. Essentially, how you would get set up with Material is you'd have a Material security instance, and then the enrollment would be as simple as, hey, I want to enroll a Google Workspace tenant or a Microsoft 365 tenant. You'd go ahead and click on that dialog. And then it really simply is, here's a client ID, here's a list of scopes. You may have different flavors for Microsoft and Google, but it's just go here in the admin page, plug these things in, click go, and you're up and running. And then from there, we'll pull in the users, the groups, etc. And you can selectively start to enable kind of a read-only syncing or protections themselves. And then from a dashboarding kind of like what's all included once you start syncing data, this kind of starts to dig into the three buckets I was talking about earlier with Klong as well. And I'll just kind of skim the surface of what's available just to give folks a sense here. But you may care about vulnerabilities in the sense that you want to know where MFA is on or off, right? In the workspace provider and the identity provider. You may want to know things like where mail exists in the environment today and where it's going by means of automation, right? So things like auto forwarding. You may care about group settings, right? So what groups allow users to post messages externally? What are the spam moderation settings? Things like that. All sorts of config settings, as well as other things like where does my sensitive data exist, right? What types do I have in mailboxes, in file shares, all that sort of stuff. So just kind of skimming the surface here, but I could go much deeper. There's tons of information that will surface out of box that might kind of get the juices flowing as to what you might want to protect.
Cool. Yeah, we'll go into a number of these in a second, but I guess you were highlighting some of the looking for security settings that you have set up in your G Suite. Would you say an analogous would be you might have a cloud security product which is looking for various security settings, like is this what are the open S3 buckets, or which databases are open to the internet, where can you SSH into a server, things like that. Sort of similar, sort of like security configuration management, but more for G Suite or your email more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's a really, kind of smart tie-in. I would say like similar industries we see today, and I'll throw a couple Gartner category names out for whatever they're worth, because I think they are fairly sticky. You have CSPM, and you're starting to see like SaaS posture management as well. We truly believe here that similar to your cloud workloads, your endpoints, the cloud office should be treated as critical infrastructure. And so we're kind of taking the same view here, that you want the same level of visibility into Google Workspace and Office 365 that you do into those other workloads as well.
Definitely. Yeah, before we get into those, could you show, for example, what the sort of standard phishing detection looks like in terms of bad email comes in, what happens next?
Yeah, sure thing. So maybe what I'll do here is I'll grab a user inbox here, and what I'm going to do is, there are a couple ways that I could show this, right? We have a phishing protection page where I can show kind of a cases view and dig into this. So I'll do this in just a second, but I also want to kind of point out what it might look like for an end user as well. So what I've just done is I've kicked off a sample phishing attack or two, and so I'll kind of show that in both places. And before I maybe dive into that, would you like to just really briefly kind of talk to our philosophy around phishing detection, where we differ, what we care about, and all that jazz?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we have seen kind of like the market space, there's kind of like the spectrum of totally black box, machine learning, AI, to sort of on the other end of the spectrum, like very manual, lots of signatures and rule sets and things that folks would have to kind of manage and fine tune on their own. And what we're trying to do here at Material is strike a balance, because I do think there's advantages to both ends of those spectrums. For example, machine learning is extremely powerful, extremely good at identifying certain types of threats, but where it can be tricky to manage is new emerging threats, new attack techniques that have never been seen before. You don't obviously have the training data to update the models, get those models out quickly, validate that the models are working the way that you expect. And similarly, if you just have a very, very large team of people writing signatures day in, day out, from an efficiency standpoint, that's really not great. And there are just things that models are going to be better at detecting than an army of human beings, and an army of human beings really doesn't scale as well. But where human beings and signatures really excel is that new emerging content. There's a campaign that showed up within the last few hours. Like, how do we get our customers protected if that's the case? And that's where having actual engineers, threat research engineers, to push out new signatures to kind of buy us time to update models and update our machine learning is like the approach that we've taken. So we kind of handle all of the fine tuning and all of the detection for our customers, but it's not like a totally black box solution. I think we're pretty transparent about the types of things that we detect in the product.
Cool. So out of the box, it detects a lot of things. But if there's a new thing that like just came out and you're like, oh, one of my employees just got sent this one, I want to make sure similar things like that don't affect anyone in my company. And I don't need to wait for Material or anyone to do that. Like I can do that myself immediately. And then eventually the Material threat research team can catch up and push it out. But you're not limited by sort of the out of box functionality, although it does come with nice things already.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we have the ability for our customers to share messages or phishing cases with us. And if we can quickly ascertain that, hey, this is a campaign that's likely to be affecting multiple customers, we can push out protection for all of those customers on very, very short notice.
Cool. Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions about like, is there sort of a herd immunity type angle? Cool. I like it.
So I'll kind of show what some of that looks like from an admin perspective and from an end user perspective. So you'll notice that I had just recently kicked off a couple emails to come through. And what I'll show first is one of the buckets that Klong just discussed around a very specific kind of signature-based detection. So this one will be an example of Quackbot malware that we had just detected. And so what you'll see here from the admin side, and just a heads up, like many of our customers run in a kind of headless format, right? So like you may be in the UI a lot, you may not be at all. Both options are kind of supported, but the UI is kind of a great visual to see how we're detecting and what we're doing here. So you'll notice Material has detected, this message. It's giving some information as to why, along with additional signals, right? So like we have, matched a signature for Quackbot malware here. We're also telling folks like, hey, this is a new sender domain. This is a new sender email. So, as you get to, as an admin, emails that may be of lower confidence or kind of borderline suspicious, malicious, these things become really helpful for the analyst to kind of triage there, or for automation to help take care of. So lots of information is put forth here. And then what we'll also do is kind of apply a sane default remediation based on the level of threat that pertains to email. So here's kind of the first area where we'll see the API-based approach having a pretty big leg up on proxies or gateways. And what that means is if I'm going to head to the end user's inbox here, right, you'll see that nothing is immediately apparent that matches this delinquent car payments subject, right? But if I go into my spam folder here, what you'll see is I have this message from 5 minutes ago. It matches that one that I just showed in the UI. And you'll see that there's this banner that's been applied, right? There's also another remediation in place where, whereas this link used to be something that, contains Quackbot malware, now when I click on the link, it has been rewritten to provide a, kind of blocked detonation splash page, right? And so the really neat thing about being API based, again, is that you can get very targeted about how you remediate things and start to introduce basically in the wild end user training to say, hey, what if we didn't actually have to delete this message, right? What if we could turn it into sort of a training exercise for the user? So that's one option. Another default you could use would be, hey, maybe I just want to delete the message, right? And so you could take the gateway approach and apply it here. You can always customize these things after the fact, but there's tons of options as far as detection goes. And I'm just kind of showing one of those, but lots of optionality and flexibility there. The one thing I'll also get to here is I'm going to share kind of a example. Let's pick this one of basically what Klong was discussing around having the flexibility to extend the solution should you need to. So in this case, I'm showing an email that's going to get through basically any gateway or built-in detection technique. So this is things like what's built into Google, what's built into Microsoft. And what I mean by this is attacker might send things like high reputation domain, right? It's a OneDrive link, or here's a Google form, right? That on the surface is probably something that looks benign, but maybe I'm asking for your phone number, right? Or your personal email, so I can go phone port you or pop you where there's no security team watching, right? So in this case, I'm going to be a good corporate citizen as an end user, and I'm going to report this email, and I'm going to do so with the label. Basically, Material will integrate with anything the organization uses today to report these messages. But what I'll kind of show next, right, is how we can leverage that information to protect other users in the organization, and then potentially build custom detection functionality on top of that. So if I'm an admin and that user has just reported this message, what we'll see here is, this has created a new case in Material. And what I'll highlight here is that the scope of this case shows that there are two messages here, right? So I'm going to kind of navigate into this case. And a couple really neat things on the Material side is that we'll automatically, kind of use generative AI to provide reasons why, this could be malicious or safe, for things like user reports. And then we'll also go ahead and kick off the investigation for you, right? So in this case, you'll notice that this detected message is here, but there's also a similar message. And you'll notice that this went to a different user and has a different subject, but we are matching based off of the link, right? So this kind of gets into the ability to compress kind of the traditional workflow here of email gets reported, SOC or other team has to start investigating, determining good or bad, and then providing a remediation and going to look for other messages that match that criteria. We're kind of condensing that all into one quick workflow here. So yeah, I won't go into a ton of detail beyond this just for brevity's sake, but wanted to call that out as well. And then just to put a visual onto what Chris was talking about, there's options to share that case with Material. If you wanted us to kind of build further detections off of that. But then you might also be able to do things like this, right? So I can now go into Material's search functionality and say, I know the subject of that email contained Star Wars 12 here. I'm going to search for all emails with that subject. You could combine this with other search operators if you wanted to. But from here, I could say, great, I've got 8 emails. I want to save this down as a new detection moving forward. And I want to provide a very specific remediation for messages like this. So kind of combining the approach of let's give folks whatever they need out of box, and then also give them the tools and functionality to build custom things on top of that where necessary.
In a previous life, I was an incident responder and detection engineer, and knowing that I didn't have to go to some forensic discovery tool to just run a search across mailboxes, just the message search in Material when I had first seen the demo before I joined the company was so eye-opening and so appealing to me. It was just really awesome because the tooling that existed previously to do searches across mailboxes was slow, clunky, and just not fun to use in general.
Yeah, I like that. It's this email is shady. Okay, find me all similar or identical emails, or even that share a link. Just like fan out, and then okay, cool. Now let's write a custom detection from there. All within the same nice workflow. I like that. So moving on. So we've been talking so far about an attacker trying to get in. Let's talk a little bit about once they're already in. Let's say they've compromised a specific user. One thing we were talking about before is once you have access to someone's email, you can get access to a lot of other things. So yeah, could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure thing. I actually have this chart or visual that I like to use kind of when discussing this. And it's actually quite old, but I'll show it in any case, just maybe as a way to prompt discussion here. This is from an old Brian Krebs article that I just kind of constantly refer back to. When you think of a hacked email account or even just kind of like a workspace or Microsoft account, there's really a lot that you can do with this account, right? It's obviously the content therein. I would be able to exfil pretty quickly. But then you think about other things that account might be tied to, right? It's other services. So, this is maybe geared towards a personal account, but maybe my Amazon account or my Twitter account, like things that traditionally haven't supported that I could go reset a password for. So I won't go through each one of these, but I think it's a good illustration of like there's a lot behind the curtain here besides just what's in the inbox. So I think it's a really unique perspective to start thinking about it that way.
Then I think from another perspective as well is, ideally a mail inbox doesn't include any type of sensitive information. We all know that social security numbers, credit cards, healthcare information is not supposed to be sitting in inboxes. I think what we've seen in practice is that information one way or another does find itself there. And when you do have these compromises, you need to figure out, did this data leave the inbox, which can sometimes be tricky to figure out depending on the level of logging that you have. And then B, what are my obligations once I found out that, oh yes, some of this very sensitive, customer data was in my inbox, and we've determined that it did leave, and the attacker has possession of it. What sort of breach notifications does this trigger, and what sort of compliance implications does this have for my organization? And not knowing ahead of time what type of information is in the mailbox means you're going to be digging through emails one by one and looking for, is there sensitive information in here? So having the ability to do defense in depth within the inbox and having it not be game over as soon as an attacker has inbox there is, I think, pretty crucial.
Yeah, when an email account has been compromised, it's not like anything they've ever been CC'd or BCC'd on for the 5 years they were an employee. Yeah, definitely. I want to dig into that in more detail, but quickly before we do, Max was already talking about this, but I think even though a company may have set up SSO for Slack or Salesforce or other services, in many respects, email is kind of like identity online because you can use the password reset flow. Sometimes, I think, depending on the app, even when the administrator has been like, don't allow you to do that. Like sometimes services can still allow that. So I think if you might be like, well, they just have access to the inbox. It's like, well, now they reset access to GitHub. So now they're accessing source code. They do a password reset on Slack, and now they're reading internal company chat. Like there's anything that email has access to, depending on the settings of the service provider. It's like, it's just one password reset away, which is sad.
Yeah, we've definitely seen instances where enabling SSO on an application doesn't inherently disable like local accounts on it. So, let's say you had an application that you enrolled users in before your organization may have had SSO, and then you went and eventually flipped the SSO switch on. Those local accounts may still work. So, an attacker could use a password reset to leverage getting access into that application.
Sad. You thought you were protected, but not always. Yep. Well, cool. Yeah, I think something, Klong, you were just talking about. So the attacker has access to the person's email. They at one point had access to different sensitive things. Could you tell me a little bit more about how Material gives me visibility into like what is all the sensitive data in my environment, and if there's a way to sort of protect information that's sensitive that was sent, even if it was a while ago?
Absolutely. So when you think of how Material is interacting with the mail APIs, effectively what we're getting is a firestream of events, of mail events from the cloud providers. And we are looking through the message content to see if there's anything that we deem to be sensitive in the message. And sensitive can mean many things to many different organizations. Like I mentioned, it could be healthcare information, passport IDs, social security numbers. We have dozens of different categories that customers, depending on what they care about or expect to be in inboxes, can kind of turn on or turn off. But once we deem that there is sensitive content within a message, what we have the ability to do is effectively use the APIs to rewrite the content of the message. And so we take the original content, the sensitive content out, whether that's in the body or an attachment, and we put that in secure storage in the customer's tenant. And we replace the actual message with a step-up authentication request, a little button here that Max is demoing right now that says, hey, Material has deemed that there's sensitive content in this message. We believe there's confidential information. And really, we support any sort of challenge to do this. It could be you're on a trusted IP address, or you can basically use anything as a challenge here, but I think MFA is the most common one. And so what you end up seeing is somebody just goes through this MFA. It's like pretty low friction. It doesn't take very long to get this message back, and it's written transparently right back into their inbox. And the nice thing is, as well, it's written back for some, admin defined grace period. So after they're done doing whatever it is they needed to do with this message, after some amount of time, it's going to lock itself back up as well. So there's no need to remember to like lock the door on your way out. We handle that for you.
Nice. Yeah, I like this a lot because rather than being like, oh, this sensitive information is just lying around forever, it's like, well, if it's been 6 months or a year and you haven't looked at it, like maybe it doesn't need to just be lying around. And then sort of what you were saying, not only are you forcing sort of the 2FA or other step up, which by the way is giving you awesome telemetry into, oh, hey, somebody is like accessing this thing from 5 years ago that was some like investor report or some financial information. Like, why? Like, well, why are they accessing this thing? So that's interesting from both a insider threat point of view as well as telemetry to be like, oh, that's interesting, especially if they try to access a couple of things and especially if they fail maybe the step up.
Yeah, I think that's just naturally kind of what happens is all this content in email boxes builds up over time. Nobody is thinking as they're going through their email like, oh, should I delete this in case my email box gets compromised? Like that's not top of mind for anyone, and really shouldn't be. I think like what we've seen in practice is people don't need to access sensitive content repeatedly on a day-to-day basis. It's pretty unusual for someone to need to do multiple unlocks in a single day, unless there's some sort of like incident that facilitates the fact that you need to go access all these old sensitive messages. But in terms of day-to-day work, digging deep into your archives to find old invoices or code samples or something like that is like a pretty rare thing to have happen. So yeah, any sort of unlocking in bulk activity is usually worth looking into from an insider threat perspective or, attacker in the inbox perspective. And the nice thing is, even if you have an attacker who's just going to be as aggressive as possible, right? Maybe they get into the inbox and they're like, I'm not going to use Gmail search to start digging through this here. I could search through this, these 50,000 emails for 6 hours. I'm just going to export the entire database of email. I'm going to get my inbox file or my PST from Outlook, and I'm just going to go dig through all of this offline. What does Material do in that situation? Well, in that situation, the attacker, when they go to open that email that they think contains suspicious content, they're just going to be faced with that button, that step up authentication request. And so, they're going to click the button, maybe, if they want to try to get through an MFA challenge and probably be stuck there. So even in cases where attackers are being really aggressive, you're still going to be protected.
Yeah, I like this because even for me personally, I know that there's a bunch of emails where I'm like, well, this is like kind of sensitive information that I don't really need access to that often, but I kind of want access to it in the future just in case I need it. So I don't want to delete it, but it is kind of I don't know, like walking around with a lot of money in your pocket and you're like, I don't like you're just like on more alert, even though you're like, well, I don't want to get rid of it. I like it. Sorry, Max, you were showing a cool demo a second ago. Was there anything else you wanted to add about that?
Yeah, sure. I think maybe it might be helpful to show some of the identity based stuff that we were touching on a moment ago. So maybe in this case, I'll walk through a couple things that we just chatted about. So you'll notice. Clint, you mentioned this gives you a lot of awesome telemetry on folks that might be accessing sensitive content on a regular or weird basis. So I'll kind of just show really quickly that all of this is logged and tracked in Material, and you can push this into any external tool. Perhaps a great example of doing something like that would be the second use case we talked about, right? Of attackers in the inbox, right? I'll put my hoodie up, right? I'm no longer Max. I'm a bad actor here. And in the case that I do what Klong was suggesting and download the inbox file or the PST, and I'm going through certain emails, I may find out, okay, I can't get access to any of the sensitive content, but I might also browse through here and go, okay, they've got a Google account, they've got some of these other services. So naturally, like I may try and take over additional accounts, right? Not just the Google account. And so if I were to actually go do that, what I'll do here is, let's assume this person has a Box account. I'll go reset this password, and all it takes is like one of these apps to allow for a reset. Or I've seen use cases where where folks are like, oh yeah, we've put this on an OAuth deny list. And then users just go sign up for it direct with username and password. So there's always bound to be like one of these things, right? So what you'll see here is, in this case, it gets the same treatment, only the time scale is flipped, right? Like this is at its most sensitive the second it hits the inbox, right? And so we'll actually rewrite it pre-delivery here. And just for sake of demo here, what I'll show is I'll say, yep, this was me as the attacker. I'm going to try and get access to this. And I'm actually going to say no here. And before I do that, I obviously have a Google session. I'll also show that, I've got an Okta session here. And so I'll say no. We'll surface an opaque error. And the neat thing of being able to tie into this telemetry is you can do things like kill, the user's Google session and kill their Okta session as well, right? So if I go back to Google now, you'll notice my session has expired. And if I do the same here on Okta, right, like I'm signed out there as well. So there's lots of neat ways that you can extend this, in order to layer in additional protection.
Nice. I like that. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, we were talking about how having access to someone's email indirectly gives you access to everything they have access to. But yeah, you can use the same rewriting capability to capture password resets before someone can do it. Nice. I like that. Very cool. Actually, along those lines, since we're sort of talking about getting access to other systems once you're already in, I'm curious. So let's say, you find an attacker, you maybe kill that session, you rotate the person's credentials. Like, what are some other sneaky ways that someone can maintain access to an inbox in maybe ways that aren't immediately obvious?
I think one of the one that comes to mind and we see most common is either inbox forwarding rules. So they'll go set up forwarding to have, malicious all email to that account sent to an attacker defined mailbox, or they'll go modify inbox rules because they're planning on sending some sort of malicious email to the user in the future, and they want to make sure it doesn't go to spam, or they want to make sure certain messages. We've seen things where people set up inbox rules where it's like, hey, you have malware on your system, and the attacker wants to make sure that those notifications that you get from your EDR or whatever are just going to get sent straight to spam, so that they can take further actions on the system without being detected. So always lots of tricky things that attackers are thinking about.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, so let's say some auto forwarding rules are set up. Another thing I've heard of is granting access to like OAuth apps that the attacker controls that give them like API access to the inbox. So they don't need to log in because they can do so programmatically. And Max, I was wondering, could you demonstrate like, I'm running security for an org. How do I get visibility into these auto forwarding rules or, which OAuth apps have been approved? Like it's almost kind of like a visibility problem. Like obviously there's security applications, but really it's kind of like, what's going on in my environment?
I think there's two views that folks take. There's kind of like the point in time organizational view of like, do I have a problem with one of these categories, be it forwarding or OAuth access? So there's that, which I'll show in just a moment. I'd maybe call that first bucket like the snapshot view, and then the second one is maybe more incident specific. And I would call that kind of like the near real time or account specific view. And that would be the use case of, hey, I've noticed something funky about this account, right? Maybe they've just tried to access a sensitive message, or there was a potentially suspicious email that they received, right? Like I want to know everything about this account. And so we provide capabilities on both fronts here. So maybe what I'll show is a couple different portions of the console here, and I'll kind of highlight both of those buckets, so to speak. So from a snapshot perspective, oftentimes when folks plug into something like Material, they gain a lot of value from this snapshot approach, right? Is okay, great. Like where is auto forwarding set up broadly speaking, right? Do I have 3 instances of auto forwarding or 300, right? And do I have a problem there? What's internal, what's external, what's the criteria for which that's occurring? So this is great from like a snapshot perspective. I'll also kind of just show the third party apps portion, right? So like, you might come down here and see, great, do any of these apps have OAuth access with restricted scopes? And that's a Google specific term, but it basically just means something extra permissive, right? That I might want to care about. So there's tremendous value in the snapshot approach in that you probably want to know when you plug in, is there a way I can aggregate all of this data and see whether we need to start initiatives to trim down on some of this access? The second portion, which is really interesting actually, is great. I know I have, 37 accounts using this app, right? But let's say I tomorrow get a suspicious email and I notify the security team, hey, Material warned me about this message. I clicked through the speed bump. I think it's fine, but I just wanted to let you all know, right? And that's where the account specific view might be really, really interesting, right? So what I'll show here is kind of a different view of these similar concepts. You'll notice for this account Chandler, right? I get to see like the issues associated with this account. And an issue could really be any of those things that I showed on that snapshot view. It could be, auto forwarding, it could be suspicious logins or protocols like IMAP or POP enabled. But in this case, I might see that like a user clicked through, a material warning. And then on July 22nd, we picked up an issue that says like they're auto forwarding all email externally, right? So, in isolation, that like warning click through might not be that severe, but this second issue might be really interesting to look at. So hopefully that's kind of helpful to see where both of those come in.
Yeah, that is. Thank you. Continuing on the line of sort of visibility, one thing I was curious about is so currently, my day job is at a startup, SemGrep. So even though we don't have a ton of people, it's not always obvious. Well, I guess regardless of the company, to know like who's using which SaaS apps in your application, or sorry, in your company. Is there some random one-off SaaS app that only one person is using, or is there, I don't know, some like HR or some app that like probably PII is going there that as a security team, you're like, I didn't even know my company was using this. Um, yeah. So is there a way that having these deep hooks into email can help you surface that level of visibility for a security team?
Yeah, I can kind of get us started here. I talked to a lot of security teams around this, like, I don't know that there's a name to this concept, but maybe the access funnel for, the universe of apps at a company. And what I mean by that is if we're adopting a new app tomorrow at material security, option one or like plan A is let's get this behind the identity provider. Everyone should authenticate via SAML, and we are, this is well governed. We know who has access, et cetera, et cetera. That's, ideal, right? If that's not the case, right? Or like some folks don't have access to this tool, let's call it Box. Let's stick with the Box example, right? They may realize I can just go to Box and sign up using my Gmail address. And I'm just going to say sign in with Google, right? So this is maybe option 2 or option B, which is I'm going to go use OAuth to access this thing with a free account. And that's obviously, you prefer option A, but option B is sometimes okay, sometimes not. Really depends on the app and what's in there, and it's really hard to get visibility on that. A lot of folks answer option B by saying, "All right, I don't want folks signing into Box with the Google account, and we're a Google shop, so I'm just going to put it on the OAuth deny list." Now you've reached this risky scenario where like a user may still go to Box and say they allow me to sign up with the username and password, and like that's kind of the worst of the three options. Is I've now just pushed them to a place where I have zero telemetry traditionally into this usage. And this is a really interesting area where Material comes in, is because we're able to scan historical email the same way we detect sensitive content in inboxes. We can also detect app-based emails. So this could be anything from, a user is using Box, and we know because Box sends emails to the user, or it could be something, more severe, like, hey, I just noticed a sign up for a Google Cloud project, right? And we're an AWS shop. And so that could be really risky, right? Like, is our code, being, deployed somewhere where we're not aware of, right? So it can kind of span the gamut here. And so what we do in this space is we'll tell you based on email data, right? Some very interesting kind of like almost CASB like stuff, right? Of what is the estimated number of accounts using all of these services. We can also break that down into over the past month, 3 months, year, like, what services have been used. This is, you can tell we demo with Box in this environment, but typically this is like, 30, 40 apps, and the emails might be activations and resets or just account-based emails. And then, lastly, what you can do here is you can even just say, hey, I want to see all the account reset emails or activations for a given service, right? So I can just go ahead and use message search to kind of extend that functionality here. You'll notice riveting stuff, all Box password resets, but
And I think tying it back to some real world examples as well, I think some folks think of shadow IT and it's internal teams fighting about whether they should use Jira or Asana or Trello. And, one team is going to go sign up for something that's not the company official designated project tool. And that's not a super impactful example. But conversely, I think there's a lot of suspicion that a lot of the recent breaches we've seen in companies like AT&T were the result of folks using like Snowflake in an unauthorized way, right? So either they didn't have MFA on their enterprise account, or they were just going and signing up for demo accounts, not setting up MFA on their demo account and loading actual production data into those Snowflake instances. And that's kind of the worst case scenario for both the company and reputationally for Snowflake as well. So shadow IT, I think, sometimes gets kind of overlooked as an organizational risk.
Yeah, totally. And oftentimes, email is sort of the source of truth where if you're signing up for a service or, lots of workflow cycle type things on different apps, it all has like little trail remnants in your email. So, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So, we've been talking a lot about email so far, but obviously, there can be lots of sensitive info in, say, Google Drive or things like that. And I think you guys told me that you can also do a similar protection of sensitive stuff there. So yeah, I was wondering, Max, if you could briefly show what sort of offerings Material has there.
Yeah, sure thing. So heading into services like Drive, OneDrive was a really natural extension for us in the sense that we're already targeting kind of a very unstructured data set in email, structuring that, making it queryable, and running detections on that, right? Is it sensitive? Is it suspicious, et cetera? So, because those APIs are just a couple scopes away, right? We extended our functionality to support those. The only difference is the remediations, right? Might be slightly different. Instead of rewriting a file, you might say, hey, I want to revoke permissions for this file, right? Email is a one-way freight train, right? You can't necessarily pull an email back once it's been sent externally, but you can with files. And so that opens up a couple really neat use cases. So what this looks like in Material, aside from all the reporting, which we've kind of covered on the email side, is similar to the search functionality here. I can start to answer questions like where are a phrase I've heard a couple customers use is where are the toxic combinations within my file sharing footprint, right? So that might mean like, hey, it is sensitive. So it contains SSNs, credit cards. I'll just use any here. And it's shared, might be externally, could be with public link. And so here's where we kind of get into areas of like data exfiltration, maybe not by bad actors, but just by end users who are trying to move quickly here and don't realize that like when they hit share, with the internet, a checkbox is checked, right? So from a visibility perspective, investigation perspective, discovery perspective, like this is already quite useful, right? The ability to just say, tell me across my entire, Drive footprint where sensitive information is shared publicly. And so you'll see, I kind of had full visibility into this. We give you the ability to investigate these files, et cetera. And then you can also do things, on this front that include saving them down as detections. And when you do that, you can make the call that like, hey, when this happens, it immediately gets unshared, or hey, maybe I want to webhook into a different platform and just notify like, hey, this is something that the security team should take a look at. But it opens the door to lots of use cases like that.
Cool. I like that. Yeah, you've mentioned a couple of times the sort of extensibility and customizability. I was curious if you could share a little bit more, maybe some advanced customers, like what's some sort of cool stuff that they build off of, so they don't have to write their own integrations with all of Google's complex APIs. Maybe they're just building on sort of nice higher level abstractions that Material provides. So I don't know. I was curious if I'd share there.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'll share a couple things. One is in-app, right? And the first is just what's native in the product in terms of our API and our events portion of our platform, right? So anything I've shown in the UI today, you can do via API as well. And so some of the most common use cases there are folks running orchestration around, hey, we want to search for a particular IOC that we saw elsewhere, right? That's a great use case for our API. Others include just an ability to use us as an eventing platform of Material has detected something, a user has added auto forwarding, a new OAuth app has been added, right? Like this is a great way to use our event subscriptions to say, I want to push this to a SIM, a SOAR, elsewhere. The one thing that I also will call out here, and I don't have a visual quite handy for this, but I do kind of want to mention it, is we are architected in a very unique way. And for each customer, we get a single tenant piece of infrastructure spun up that is fully isolated from other customers. And the reason that is especially unique for us is we'll give folks access to this infrastructure. And what that means is not only do you have our APIs and events, you have the querying ability in the infrastructure itself, right? So if I wanted to write raw SQL against the data that Material provides in the UI, I could do so. And so I could also do things like subscribe to the messaging topics that our app uses, right? So, if you're in AWS land, right, like you might write a Lambda on top of, I think theirs is SQS, right? We typically use GCP. So this would be like a cloud function on a pub subtopic. And without getting too in the weeds, again, these are typically either analytics use cases. So, hey, Material knows about apps used via email, apps used via OAuth. I want to build a custom Snowflake dashboard around all of my app usage and join that with some of my CASB data. So that might be an analytics use case. There are also orchestration use cases such as, hey, I just noticed a file execution event. I want to write a optimized query on years and years of email to see, did we ever see this file hash in messages, right? So the orchestration use cases exist there as well, but a lot of really neat stuff that some of our more technical customers will use heavily.
Cool. Yeah, I like it. And it's nice having a sort of single tenant architecture, given obviously people's email is very sensitive. So I think having that isolation is quite nice. Well, cool. Thank you both so much for your time. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Yeah. So where can people go to learn more about Material, or where can people follow what cool stuff you guys are up to?
Yeah, the best place to find out more is, we're pretty transparent on the site. We try to stay kind of marketing slim. So material.security is our TLD. There's lots of good info on our product and such there. And then, there's always, for the socialites, there's always, our company has a presence on LinkedIn as well. I know Chris and myself are on there as well. So yeah, you can find us there too.
Well, thanks so much for your time. Thank you everyone for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Clint. You too. Appreciate it.
For sure.